Delhi, where Prime Minister Narendra Modi is speaking after holding bilateral talks with Anthony Albanese.
कल्चर और क्रिकेट का यह सेलिब्रेशन एक प्रकार से भारत और ऑस्ट्रेलिया की मित्रता के जोश और उल्लास का उत्तम प्रतीक है। फ्रेंड्स, आज हमने आपसी सहयोग के विभिन्न पहलुओं पर विस्तार से चर्चा की। सुरक्षा सहयोग हमारी कॉम्प्रिहेंसिव स्ट्रेटेजिक पार्टनरशिप का एक महत्वपूर्ण स्तंभ है। आज हमारे बीच इंडो पैसिफिक क्षेत्र में मैरीटाइम सिक्योरिटी और आपसी रक्षा और सुरक्षा सहयोग बढ़ाने पर विस्तार से चर्चा हुई। रक्षा के क्षेत्र में हमने पिछले कुछ सालों में उल्लेखनीय एग्रीमेंट्स किए हैं, जिनमें एक दूसरे की सेनाओं के लिए लॉजिस्टिक्स सपोर्ट भी शामिल है। हमारी सुरक्षा एजेंसीज के बीच भी नियमित और उपयोगी सूचना का आदान प्रदान है और हमने इसे और सुदृढ़ करने पर चर्चा की। हमारे युवा सैनिकों के बीच संपर्क और मित्रता बढ़ाने के लिए हमने जनरल रावत ऑफिसर्स एक्सचेंज प्रोग्राम की स्थापना की है, जो इसी महीने आरंभ हुआ है। फ्रेंड्स, आज हमने विश्वस्त और मजबूत वैश्विक सप्लाई चेन्स के विकसित करने के लिए आपसी सहयोग पर विचार विमर्श किया। रिन्यूएबल एनर्जी दोनों देशों के लिए प्राथमिकता और फोकस का क्षेत्र है और हम क्लीन हाइड्रोजन और सोलर में साथ मिलकर काम कर रहे हैं। पिछले साल लागू हुए ट्रेड एग्रीमेंट एकता से दोनों देशों के बीच ट्रेड और इन्वेस्टमेंट के बेहतर अवसर खुले हैं और हमारी टीमें कॉम्प्रिहेंसिव इकोनॉमिक कोऑपरेशन एग्रीमेंट पर भी काम कर रही है। फ्रेंड्स, पीपल टू पीपल संबंध भारत ऑस्ट्रेलिया मित्रता का एक प्रमुख आधार है। हमने एजुकेशनल क्वालिफिकेशंस की परस्पर मान्यता के लिए एक मैकेनिज्म पर हस्ताक्षर किए हैं, जो हमारे छात्र समुदाय के लिए उपयोगी होंगे। हम मोबिलिटी एग्रीमेंट पर भी आगे बढ़ रहे हैं। यह छात्रों, कामगारों और प्रोफेशनल के लिए लाभदायक होगा। भारतीय प्रवासी अब ऑस्ट्रेलिया में दूसरा सबसे बड़ा इमिग्रेंट समुदाय है। यह इंडियन कम्युनिटी ऑस्ट्रेलिया के समाज और अर्थव्यवस्था में उल्लेखनीय योगदान दे रहा है। यह खेद का विषय है कि पिछले कुछ सप्ताहों से ऑस्ट्रेलिया में मंदिरों पर हमलों की खबरें नियमित रूप से आ रही है। स्वाभाविक है कि ऐसे समाचार भारत में सभी लोगों को चिंतित करते हैं, हमारे मन को व्यथित करते हैं। हमारी इन भावनाओं और चिंताओं को मैंने प्रधानमंत्री एल्बेनीजी के समक्ष रखा और उन्होंने मुझे आश्वस्त किया है कि भारतीय समुदाय की सेफ्टी उनके लिए विशेष प्राथमिकता है। इस विषय पर हमारी टीम्स नियमित संपर्क में रहेगी और यथासंभव सहयोग करेगी। फ्रेंड्स, प्रधानमंत्री एल्बेनीजी और मैं इस बात पर सहमत है कि हमारे द्विपक्षीय संबंध वैश्विक चुनौतियों से निपटने के लिए और वैश्विक कल्याण के लिए महत्वपूर्ण है। मैंने प्रधानमंत्री एल्बेनीजी को भारत की G20 अध्यक्षता की प्राथमिकताओं के बारे में बताया और ऑस्ट्रेलिया के सतत सहयोग के लिए उनका आभार भी व्यक्त किया। भारत और ऑस्ट्रेलिया दोनों क्वाड के सदस्य हैं और आज हमने इस प्लेटफॉर्म पर हमारे बीच सहयोग पर भी चर्चा की। इस वर्ष मई में क्वाड लीडर्स समिट के लिए मुझे आमंत्रित करने के लिए मैं प्रधानमंत्री एल्बेनीजी को धन्यवाद देता हूं। उसके बाद सितंबर में G20 समिट के दौरान प्रधानमंत्री एल्बेनीजी का फिर से स्वागत करने का मुझे अवसर मिलेगा और मुझे बहुत खुशी होगी। एक बार फिर प्रधानमंत्री एल्बेनीजी का भारत में हार्दिक स्वागत है। मुझे पूरा विश्वास है कि उनकी इस यात्रा से हमारे संबंधों को नई गति और मोमेंटम मिलेगा। धन्यवाद।
Thank you, sir. May I now call upon Honourable Prime Minister of Australia to deliver his remarks.
Well, thank you very much, and I was very pleased to meet Prime Minister Modi again after our meetings at the G20 and the East Asia Summit last year. And I look forward very much to hosting Prime Minister Modi in Australia for the Quad Leaders Summit in May, and then returning to India in September for the G20 Leaders Summit. The relationship with India is multifaceted. The frequent high-level contact between Australia and India has further strengthened cooperation across a range of areas, including trade and investment, climate and energy, defence and security, and between the people of our two countries. Today, Prime Minister Modi and I discussed the strength of our economic relationship, demonstrated by the entry into force of the landmark India-Australia Economic Cooperation and Trade Agreement last year. This has eliminated tariffs on more than 85% of Australian goods exported to India, benefiting Indian consumers and providing cheaper inputs for Indian industry. We also agreed on an early conclusion of our ambitious, comprehensive economic cooperation agreement as soon as possible, and I'm hopeful that we'll be able to finalise that this year. This transformational deal will realise the full potential of the bilateral economic relationship, creating new employment opportunities and raising living standards for the people of both Australia and India. In recognition of a unique part of our bilateral economic relationship, we also discussed the potential presented by the India-Australia audio-visual co-production agreement that has been exchanged here today. This agreement will support skilled jobs, creative exchange and the development of screen projects of cultural significance in both countries. Prime Minister Modi and I also discussed the urgent need to address climate change and support the implementation of the Paris Agreement. I am proud of the existing cooperation between Australia and India on solar and hydrogen, two technologies that are critical to our energy transition goals, and the opportunities for us to work more closely to secure critical mineral supply chains. I'm pleased that today we have exchanged terms of references for the Australia-India Solar Task Force and are able to announce Australian solar expert Professor Renata Egan and eminent Indian scientist Professor Anil Kotantharil as Task Force co-chairs. The Task Force will provide our governments with advice on opportunities to accelerate solar PV deployment and enhance supply chains. I welcome significant and ambitious progress under the defence and security pillar of our relationship. Prime Minister Modi and I discussed the increasingly uncertain global security environment and committed to strengthening the Australia-India Defence and Security Partnership to address shared challenges and work towards an open, stable and prosperous Indo-Pacific. I welcome increased defence information sharing between Australia and India, including in the maritime domain. We also discussed Exercise Malabar, which Australia is honoured to be hosting this year. In recognition of the strong education links between Australia and India, I welcome a new agreement to support the mutual recognition of Australian and Indian education qualifications and am keen to further expand the presence of Australian universities here in India. I am also pleased to report that officials have made significant progress on a new migration and mobility partnership arrangement. This arrangement will promote and support the mobility of students, graduates, academic researchers, business people and other professionals from the emerging and high-tech sectors now and into the future, while also enhancing cooperation on issues pertaining to irregular migration. We hope to have more to announce on this new initiative the next time we meet in Australia. In sports collaboration, I was also honoured to join Prime Minister Modi at the first day of the fourth cricket match of the Border-Gavaskar Test Series on Thursday. And it was also a great honour, I must say, Prime Minister, to meet Sunil Gavaskar, VVS Laxman and other legends, including Harbhajan Singh yesterday. It was great to open the match at Narendra Modi Stadium in Ahmedabad, a stadium designed by a Brisbane-based architectural firm, a concrete example, literally, of the cooperation between Australia and India and the mutual benefit that arises from it. I'm pleased to have exchanged a revised sports memorandum of understanding today, which will promote cooperation between our sport-loving nations, including recognising equality, diversity and inclusion in sports, and that Kabaddi will be showcased at the 2026 Commonwealth Games to be held in regional Victoria. I am pleased to announce the appointment of Mr Tim Thomas as the inaugural Chief Executive Officer of the new Centre for Australia-India Relations. The centre will build greater understanding of the Australia-India relationship and support opportunities flowing from our burgeoning connections. I am proud of the deep and vibrant ties between Australians and Indians. These links will grow closer as our cooperation on education, renewable energy, defence, culture and sports expands. I thank you once again, Prime Minister Modi, for your extraordinary welcome here to your vibrant, diverse, wonderful nation. It's been a great honour to be here.
Thank you, sir. This concludes the press statements. Thank you all for joining.
All right, so that was the press conference by the two leaders, Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi and the Australian counterpart Anthony Albanese, after the bilateral talks that were held in New Delhi over a range of issues. Prime Minister Modi talking about security cooperation. In fact, both the Prime Ministers speaking about strengthening security cooperation in view of the increasingly uncertain global security scenario. Prime Minister Modi also talking about a comprehensive strategic partnership, how security cooperation is key to that. He also spoke about logistical support for both the militaries, speaking about supply chains, renewable energy, including clean hydrogen and solar energy.
Thank you. Next, we have the exchange of the audiovisual co-production agreement.
Also, Prime Minister Albanese talking about looking forward to hosting Prime Minister Modi in May for the Quad Summit and then coming back to India in November for the G20 Summit. He spoke about strengthening cooperation in trade, climate, defence and security. He said that what was discussed was the strength of the economic partnership. He is hoping for an early conclusion of the Comprehensive Economic Cooperation Agreement. He is hopeful that that will be finalised by the end of this year. He spoke about the urgent need to address climate change, said that he has discussed global security scenarios, strengthening the defence and security partnership between both the countries. Also speaking about open and stable Indo-Pacific, mentioning the Malabar exercises which Australia will now be hosting. The Malabar naval exercises, they will be hosting it for the first time in August, this August. So a host of issues discussed between the two leaders, including sports collaboration. We saw that cricket diplomacy at play in Ahmedabad when both the leaders were there ahead of the fourth match of the Border-Gavaskar Trophy. Prime Minister Albanese making a mention of that in his statement at that press conference after the bilateral talks. Prime Minister Modi also talking about forward movement in the mobility agreement. He also mentioned reports of the attacks on temples in Australia, saying that such reports were concerning. However, Prime Minister Albanese has assured Prime Minister Modi that safety of Indian community is paramount for his administration. Prime Minister Modi also saying that he told the Australian counterpart of India's priorities as the president of G20 after assuming G20 presidency. Quad cooperation was also discussed in that meeting. So a host of issues there discussed at that bilateral talks between Prime Minister Modi and Australian Prime Minister Anthony Albanese. The Indian Ministry of External Affairs had said that it is an extensive agenda for these talks. On the table were focus on economy and trade, defense and security, energy, education, mobility and diaspora, as well as regional and multilateral issues. So it was a wide ranging discussions that the two leaders had at this bilateral meeting that has just concluded. Now, Anthony Albanese will later be calling on the President of India as well, Draupadi Murmu. That is expected around 4:30 this evening, India time. That would be another key highlight of his visit. But after a lot of fanfare, after a ceremonial welcome that was accorded to Prime Minister Albanese, finally these talks taking place between the two leaders and a range of issues being discussed over there. Of course, open and stable Indo-Pacific, that comment coming with a subtle message there for China, and Malabar exercises that Australia will now be hosting for the first time. China was not mentioned by name during those statements by the two prime ministers. However, that was one of the themes that the discussion seems like from the statements about open and stable Indo-Pacific. Also, Quad cooperation that was discussed. Quad is essentially a grouping of 4 nations, which includes Japan and the United States, which is there primarily to counter China's growing assertiveness in the Indo-Pacific region. So lots of issues discussed over there. Let's take you through some of them. Security cooperation, one of the major issues that both the Prime Ministers mentioned. Prime Minister Albanese said that we discussed global security scenario, which is highly uncertain, and we want to strengthen bilateral defense and security partnership. So security partnership is one of the issues that was discussed. The other key issue that was discussed was trade, the strength of the economic partnership. That's how Prime Minister Albanese put it. He said that he hopes that the CECA, the Comprehensive Economic Cooperation Agreement, will be finalized between the two countries by the end of this year. Prime Minister Modi also speaking about India-Australia trade agreement and also about people-to-people ties, which is key to bilateral relationship between the two countries. Siddhant Sibal, our principal diplomatic correspondent, now joining us on the phone line, who was there tracking those developments in New Delhi very closely. Siddhant, what according to you are the key takeaways from this meeting?
Well, one of the biggest key takeaway of the meeting has been the fact that the Indian Prime Minister has publicly raised the temple vandalism in Australia. We have seen Khalistanis indulging in violence and vandalism, something that India has been raising in the past. But this has been a public issue now, with the Prime Minister raising alongside, of course, the Australian Prime Minister also standing. The second, of course, for the security aspect, both the leaders have announced Quad is going to take place in Australia in the month of May. This is the first public confirmation of something that was known for a long time, but both the leaders confirming here in Delhi that Quad is going to take place in Australia. And remember, the Australian side in the past, before the Quad came into being, was very reluctant about Quad. There was a overhang of China, that China might be a country that will not be happy with Quad coming together. But this is a new Australia which is keen to embrace India, despite, of course, the Chinese opposition, because both India and Australia somehow on the receiving end of the Chinese, India at the northern border, Australia in terms of the trade. So these are the two key points, but both sides, of course, talking about other issues like climate change, green hydrogen, people-to-people relationship. Education has been another key outcome of the visit. The visit, of course, has seen the announcement of establishment of a campus here in India, an Australian university campus that will, of course, help essentially in terms of Indians getting Australian education.
Siddhant, also let's talk about the takeaways as far as the security cooperation is concerned. That is key. You mentioned China. That could have been the underlying theme over there when Prime Minister Albanese spoke about open and stable Indo-Pacific and the Malabar exercises that Australia will be hosting for the first time this August. So let's talk about the security cooperation. How key is that given the uncertain global scenario and some would say a volatile Indo-Pacific region?
Well, when it comes to China, there is obviously a big worry for the Indo-Pacific countries, and India and Australia no different. While there was no mention of China all throughout the visit of the Australian Prime Minister from Ahmedabad to in Mumbai to, of course, here in Delhi. But there were a lot of developments that China will be keenly watching, which, of course, includes the Australian Prime Minister was on board INS Vikrant. He was the first world leader, foreign leader, in fact, to be on board INS Vikrant, given a guard of honor. Well, it's very rare for visiting a world leader to visit the key or the largest warships of India. Secondly, of course, we saw the announcement on Quad by both the leaders on Quad. That means Quad is a grouping which is here to stay despite the Chinese opposition. So whether China likes it or not, this is a new world, a world where India, Australia, US and Japan are coming together in various formats.
Siddhant, one final question to you about trade. Now, both leaders mentioned India-Australia trade agreement. There's a comprehensive economic cooperation agreement which Australia is hoping is finalized soon. How crucial is this trade agreement between the two countries?
Well, trade forms a key pillar of this relationship, as both the leaders have been talking about. ECTA, which was the interim trade agreement, which was signed and has come into effect, has seen trade barriers being removed. And both countries are hopeful that a final trade agreement will be signed soon. But the fact that ECTA, the interim agreement, was signed in a very short span, a short period of time, shows that this larger FTA can be concluded very soon. Perhaps an agreement that will pave way for further trade collaboration. In fact, the Australian Prime Minister is accompanied by top CEOs of Australian companies, including Rio Tinto, shows the interest and keenness by the Australian side to engage with India in terms of trade. And there are a lot of Indian companies who have been invested in Australia. So largely, it's
all right, Siddhant, we leave it there for the moment. Thanks very much for joining us with those details. So a host of issues discussed there at that bilateral meeting between India and Australian Prime Ministers.